Okay everyone, the Game Boy Advance is coming up and Nintendo wants us to make a new game for a launch title. I'm thinking something with MegaMan. Anyone got any ideas? A platformer, a horror game, a racing game. All great ideas, keep them up. Tony, you're awfully quiet. You do have an idea, right?
Huh? Yeah, I do. Just, here it is.
Tony, you're a genius. I don't think I need to give some long-winded spiel to introduce MegaMan. He's been around in one form or another since the mid-1980s, starred in dozens of games, practically codified the run and gun on 8-bit systems, and has had multiple iterations all along the way. If you're like me, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear that, and you've probably heard plenty of YouTubers discuss the Blue Bomber to some capacity. For quite a few of my favorite reviewers, MegaMan was a formative series for them, and I've always thought it interesting to see how different people view what's largely the same franchise. It's crazy to hear them talk about the classic or X series, and yet, in my own experience, I was a fan of the franchise for years without ever knowing any of those games existed. When I was a kid and the Game Boy Advance was everyone's jam, I didn't know about the classic series, or X, or Legends, or even Zero. For me, MegaMan meant Battle Network. These were some of my favorite GBA games growing up. With their unique combat, fun stories, and charming characters, they kept me hooked for, well, maybe halves of hours. I got bored very easily as a kid, which might explain why, despite how much I enjoy the series, I don't think I've ever finished any of the games. I've wanted to go back and experience them for quite a while, so when I heard they were finally releasing a collection with all 10 games, yep, that was a pretty great day for me. You heard me, 10 games. Although, to be honest, it's really 6 games. It's just from 3 onward, they had 2 versions for each for some reason. I can hazard a guess as to why. But along with not finishing any of the games I did play, I also realized I never played the one that started it all. Debuting as a GBA launch title in Japan makes it pretty clear Nintendo wanted a flagship series for the console in the same way Mega Man had been for the NES and SNES. However, I do want to make something clear before diving into this game. Despite playing these games quite a bit when I was younger, I must admit I have no real nostalgia for them or really anything. That fuzzy feeling and accompanying rose-tinted glasses that let everyone give Nintendo games a free pass are something I just don't experience, and I like to think that makes my opinion at least somewhat more trustworthy than watching someone named Nintendo Dude 64 discussing the latest Zelda. With that in mind, after all these years, I can say for absolute certain, this game is insanely rough. Like, cactus sandpaper. The story of Battle Network happens in an alternate version to the original continuity. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the classic series. Dr. Light developed advanced robots, including good old Mega himself, only for his bitter rival Dr. Wily to swoop in and use his own robots to try taking over the world. Again, and again, and again, and again. And how many robots could this guy find? Well, in the original Japanese story, Dr. Light's name was Dr. Hikari, and in this universe, he turned his attention to virtual connectivity and networking. Now, 3 generations later, the world is connected and dependent on the net, to the point where nearly everything is connected online, and the people use AI avatars called NetNavis to explore the internet and the inner workings of programs as if they were a physical place. Seems so much less practical than, I don't know, opening a web browser, but what do I know? Maybe the navis are moving at light speed. We play as Dr. Hikari's grandson, Lan. Yes, that is his name. If you think that's on the nose, his Japanese name is Neto. Net. Alright Capcom, I can let this slide with Ace Attorney, but this is just lazy. He's your average 5th grader, sleeping in and late for school, while his Navi, MegaMan.exe, tries to wake him up. Once he gets out of bed, he picks up his pet, short for personal terminal, and heads outside to meet his neighbor and very obvious love interest, Mail. Yes, that is her name. As we head off to school, there's also some news about a terrorist organization or something or other called WWW, which is meant to be read as World 3. But I'm sure that's just a bit of world building and won't come up ever. Oh, they set my oven on fire. How dastardly? Wait, ovens can get viruses in this world? Why would anyone need to program an oven? Battle Network 1 doesn't waste much time getting things started. Once you've gone to school to meet Dex and Yai, Lan's other friends, and get a tutorial on how combat works, you go back home just to encounter the first of many run-ins with World 3. After making your way to the end of the oven, I promise that makes sense in context, the arsonist calls you up just to tell you he's working for World 3, and his navvy is dumb enough to give up his operator's name. Just from this first encounter, you can probably tell the level of story we're dealing with here. Since Battle Network was meant to appeal to a younger audience, which makes sense given the GBA's target demographic, the whole story plays out like a typical Monster of the Week plot from a run-of-the-mill Saturday morning kids anime at the time. Except instead of monsters or robots, like you saw with other Mega Man series, it's cyber-terrorists. Surely the perfect enemy for our 11-year-old hero when he wants an excuse to put off homework. Honestly, the plot does feel like it hits the same beats of most other JRPGs, simply stringing a series of sinister schemes and silly shenanigans in sequence. I'd be a hypocrite if I said that kind of structure is bad, since so many games I like follow a similar idea. It's a good way to bring your player closer to the big bad bit by bit and show what a real threat the villains can be. Or at least it would if the villains weren't such idiots. Sure, set everyone's ovens on fire. But why? Is it just for the chaos of it all, or were you trying to straight up commit arson? Go ahead, stop the town's water supply. But why? How is that relevant to your end goal? And why not reenact the movie Speed by sabotaging the town's auto drive system? You know, you're only causing people to have actual car accidents right in front of an innocent 11-year-old, you monsters. And then threaten to make Mail's bus explode because clearly you aren't being pointlessly mean enough. That plot in particular is really dumb because apparently they were doing it to make people buy a program from them to fix the problem. But then Lan walks up and tells them to not bother with the high risk of vehicular death, and that's enough for them because each time World 3 does anything, who should be there but Lan Hikari and his talking PDA. Don't get me wrong, some of their later plots are genuinely threatening, if a little contrived, like when they sabotage a dinner held at Scilab by locking in all the guests, which apparently means they'll suffocate soon. Don't know how, it's a pretty big room and it's clearly connected to outside areas, but that's what they said. As we find out later, their big plan was just to steal a series of vital elemental programs, which as far as I can tell, means they didn't even need to do a lot of this outside harm. That thing with the bus wasn't even vital to their plans, it was just for regular old extortion. It feels like they're doing things just for the sake of being evil instead of being smart villains by just getting what they need without anyone knowing. You're making it so much easier for the authorities or one adamant grade schooler to stop you by making your scheme so obvious. Yes, I am making fun of a plot intended for children younger than the main character. I feel quite intelligent. Look, I'm not saying the story of Battle Network is bad, it's just very clear what they were going for in terms of tone. If I played this when I was a kid, I'm sure it would have been totally fine, but by that same coin, I don't imagine I would have cared much either. When an RPG plot guides you along with a series of incidents that just happen at you rather than events happening because of what you do in the story, it just feels so passive and empty. Like, yeah, I'm taking all these bad guys down and helping people, but also, man, these guys really need to do something somewhere else because Lan's just squashing them every time. I suppose it's more investing than Pokemon's usual nothing sandwich of get all the badges, but it still feels pretty flimsy. There's only so much you can cram into a game that only takes about 10 to 12 hours, and that goes for the characters as well. What's Lan like, our avatar by which we experience and interact with this world? Well, he's an 11-year-old boy written in the early 2000s, so I feel like that's enough of a description. Doesn't like school, rollerblades everywhere, doesn't want to admit he has a thing for mail because girls are icky, ew. But he's really good at fighting computer viruses, which is basically playing a video game, even though Mega Man is supposedly doing all the work, but we'll get to that later. Brings to mind characters like Dan Kuso from Bakugan and that backwards hat guy from Beyblade. Man, this kind of property really settled on an archetype, huh? Our target audience is kids who don't think backwards hats are stupid. We don't have to try very hard. Don't actually give him a backwards hat though, just a headband. Yeah, that's fine. His friends aren't much better either. I already mentioned Mail's contribution to the story being the love interest and one-time hostage, and that's about as far as she goes. She and Lan have some silly little flirting moments, which I guess is cute, but they feel like such a relic of its era. Dex is the idiot big guy whose bark is far worse than his bite. He's also apparently really good at chess. It isn't shown in this first game, but that's what the wiki says. Good for him. Yai is there. Honestly, even within Lan's friend group, she feels like the least present. Out of all the side characters, the one with the most screen time is this smug little tool, Chowd. Chow. Okay, I've been a fan of these games for like 17, 18 years or something, and I still don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. And why is this his last name in the games, but his first name in the anime? Just how? Who do I blame for this? And yes, Battle Network had an anime. It was kind of weird, but we aren't talking about it today. Out of all the side characters I mentioned so far, Chowd actually does get a nice amount of development in later games, but in this first game, man, he's a tool. Not only does he completely disregard Lan's help, he has the nerve, the gall, the absolute battle chips to act like he's all hot stuff when we keep beating him in battle. You little skunkhead, I can't wait until you have your character arc so I can beat you up more. Again, I guess it's expecting too much of a GBA launch title. You can beat it under 12 hours. If anything, the world is the most relatable thing in this game. As time goes on, Battle Network 1 seems more and more oddly prophetic. To make the story more appealing to a new audience, Capcom swapped out the far future full of fighting robots with something closer to real life. During the turn of the millennium, when the internet was gaining traction and people thought Y2K was something that would actually happen, it seemed like there were no limits to what could be done with the World Wide Web. At least from what I've heard, I wasn't exactly sentient enough to notice the rapid progression of technology at the time. Still, it was a big deal, and speculation on what kind of tech we could expect in the then near future gave us some of my favorite examples of hypothetical events. Remember iRobot showing androids and AI taking over the workplace and replacing real people, and WALL-E showing the results of massive corporations disregarding the environment? Man, why couldn't we get one of the cooler ideas in real life, like functional Gundams? I found the weapon of the proletariat! Really though, think about how many devices in the modern home are connected to the internet or have some kind of basic programmability. The Internet of Things connects various platforms with the cloud or other networks, voice-controlled assistants like Alexa, robot vacuums, talking fridges. What a time to be alive. I still don't know if a smart oven can get a virus, but you know, maybe one day we can remotely set someone's house on fire. With all that being so familiar today, the concept of net navies really doesn't seem all that out there. I mean, sure, they're basically just advanced Tamagotchi with more pixels, but the idea of having an AI companion that talks to you from what's basically a PDA seems more reasonable nowadays than it did in 2001. For better or far worse. Speaking of the navies, one aspect I didn't appreciate as a kid was how most of the ones you encounter are based on robot masters from the old games. The first World 3 navi you fight is Fireman, and this won't be the only time we fight him in the series. Electman is also here, and the only way you can hurt him is by Land flicking off an electrified switch. Not important to mention, but I just find the sight of Land getting electrocuted very cathartic. Iceman is also here, sadly no sign of Maverick. Even Gutsman is back, reformed to become Dex's Navi. Some of them are original, like Numberman, but repurposing old robot masters is a great way to reinforce the idea of this being an alternate universe to the original series. There are a ton more references to prior Mega Man games too. Land has a poster of Legends 2 in his room, even if it's a bit hard to tell from the pixels. Mail has a Surfbot toy in her room, very cute. If you look around for a bit, you can fight extra navis like Woodman and Skullman, as well as navi versions of Shadowman, Pharaohman, and Bass. I didn't find those three in my playthrough because it takes quite a bit of digging, but it's cool they're there. Wily is even the main villain, and I don't think that counts as a spoiler. And of course, Proto-Man is here as well, being the navi of Chowd and using his shield. A number of viruses are also based on enemies from old games, like the classic Metars. I'm glad hackers are taking the time to model and program all these different looks for their malicious programs. I appreciate the effort. In fact, I appreciate this game's presentation as a whole. For a GBA launch title, the sprite work and isometric environments look very nice, full of color and enough detail to clearly make out on the small screen for which the game was intended. Now, since I'm playing this on the Switch, I have my settings to display the largest image possible. Possibly a bad idea in retrospect when recording, but hey, I dig those chunky pixels. There aren't very many places to explore here, limited to AC/DC Town, Scilab, and Den Town? Is that supposed to be a play on downtown? Capcom, you're pushing my limits here. I will admit, I'm not huge on the character portraits since each character only has one regardless of what they're saying. Maybe it's due to cartridge space. They didn't have the luxury of the Ace Attorney devs where the whole sprite takes up the screen. But hey, it is nice getting a better look at the characters' faces. Conveys a bit more personality than just watching little totem people. And the music, the music is great. Not as good as future titles, but certainly some tunes I'll be using in videos going forward. It's all great stuff. Pretty impressive given the GBA's limitations limitations. So yeah, even if the story and characters are a bit too flat for me these days, I can at least find solace in how this world is presented as I go around battling viruses. Now, how you navigate this world and fight those viruses, that's where MegaMan Battle Network starts to get a little wacky. This is clearly where all the effort went, and despite how unique the gameplay style is, it's pretty easy to tell their inspirations. Like most things in any creative field, you can almost see all the different concepts and ideas taken from other series and break them down into their essential components. Capcom took a look at what people liked on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, mashed it with an aesthetic of kids anime at the time, and made a very bizarre amalgamation, which to this day still doesn't have anything quite like it outside of its own series. Okay, so what was a big hit on the Game Boy before? Well, Pokemon was a massive hit. Alright, let's do some kind of RPG. We haven't done that with Mega Man before. Anything else popular with kids right now? Well, Fire Emblem was pretty successful, and the War series is still going strong. Great, so we'll include tactics somehow. Anything else? Card games? Excuse me? Card games, lots of those going around right now. The kids love it. Great, then do that too. I'm serious, Battle Network still has one of the most unique combat systems in all of gaming, and the only games I know that have tried something similar are more recent ones like N-Cycle Versus and One Step from Eden, which were made in direct homage and inspiration to Battle Network. The devs aimed to make an RPG a traditionally slower genre using a franchise known for constant action and movement. Spin-off or not, that's a pretty jarring mashup, but they somehow pulled it off. I've tried for years to think of a way to describe the combat in Battle Network, and the best I can get is by saying it's a real-time tactical action RPG that's also a deck builder. Which I know sounds about as appealing as first-person turn-based competitive cooking simulator, but I promise it works. Or at least the idea of it works. Let's not forget, this was the first time anyone's tried something like this, and they didn't have anywhere from which they could borrow a template. It was all cooked up by the Battle Network devs. How it works is, you enter the net with Mega Man by jacking into compatible devices. Stop smirking, you dunce, don't think I can't see you through the screen. Anyway, once you're traveling the information superhighway, you'll have random encounters with viruses that bring you to this side-on grid area. It's divided into 18 spaces split down the middle, and this is where the real-time tactical action part comes in, because you can freely move from space to space during battle. Stepping around to dodge oncoming attacks or lining up your own is the basis of combat here, and so many of your own attacks, as well as opponents, are entirely dependent on positioning. In a way, it does still harken back to classic Mega Man, except rather than lining up your shots by jumping, it's a more rigid structure of rows and columns. And just like old Mega Man, you still have the Mega Buster. It deals out small amounts of damage, and it's really useless at the start, but by finding power-up programs, you can increase its attack, firing rate, or charge speed. Nice little sidearm to have if all else fails, but the main thing that makes this combat so much fun is the battle chip system. Dude, this is brilliant. Much like how the grid system can be compared to the free running and jumping of old, if I reach hard enough, the battle chips can be seen as the replacement for special weapons. You could stick to your Mega Buster, but that's not going to get you very far. The real power comes from all the chips you collect and take into battle, from swords to bombs to shockwaves to other net navies to nice big cannons. There are elemental attacks, recovery items, dozens upon dozens of possibilities from which you can form your deck. Of course, you can't just throw all your best chips in with no restrictions. There are some rules to follow and plan around to get the most out of your collection. In order to help explain these rules, I'm going to use the no seriously for real, this is a thing that really exists, Mega Man NT Warrior trading card game. This series had everything. So, your folder, or rather your deck, can hold a total of 30 battle chips. Of those 30, you can have up to 5 Navi chips and 10 regular chips with the same name. From that, you might think, alright, so I can just toss in whatever I want so long as it fits the limit. And you totally can. But once you get into battle, you'll realize there's more to it than just cramming in the biggest numbers. See, when you start a fight, land randomly picks out 5 chips for you to pick from. And whatever you don't choose will be carried over to your next hand, so to speak. A battle chip has a few traits to keep in mind. A name, attack, and this little letter right here in the corner. Now this is where the real building begins. The first chip you pick every hand can be whatever, but to pick more than just one and deal more damage to opponents without needing to wait so long between selections, you have to match the choices in some way. Kind of like forming hands in poker, all your choices need to have something in common with either their names or codes. Every chip also comes in a number of different codes within a range of letters, so if you'd like to use more of a certain code or chip, you can increase its synergy in your deck by finding the right combination. For example, let's say you have a hand consisting of 2 Cannon A's, 1 Cannon B, 1 Bomb B, and 1 Quake H. If your first pick is one of the Cannon A's, you can then take both of the remaining cannons but not the Bomb or Quake. If you start with the Cannon B, you can take either the Cannon A's or the Bomb B, but not all of them. If you pick Bomb B, your only remaining choice is Cannon B. Finally, if your first pick is Quake H, you can't take anything else because neither main attributes are shared with other chips. And this is where OCD players should look away in terror, because unless you grind up a whole folder of similarly coded chips, your deck is more than likely to be a mess of various piles that just kind of work together, but rarely so much you can always guarantee to get all 5 chips in hand. And even if you can find a folder full of A codes, it's probably not going to be very strong. Most of the rarer, more powerful chips have letters higher in the alphabet, meaning if you want to use some nicer, bigger cannons, you're going to need to find more chips that match their attributes. As you find more and more from shops or enemy drops, you'll need to restructure your deck over and over to fit in the stronger ones without them being all by their lonesome. And keep in mind, there are 175 different battle chips in this game, each having a range of different possible codes, so yeah, have fun with that. Personally, I'd recommend finding a handful of chips you really like using and building your deck around those. I stick to the Shockwave chips and Quakes because they have solid damage output and aren't too hard to find, along with a lineup of basic cannons to fill out some codes and occasionally access a program advance. I can only do this with the cannons since you only get program advances by lining up your same named picks in alphabetical order, but don't try and make this the point of your deck, it isn't worth it. Sounds nice, just isn't practical. I also utilized quite a few swords, with my favorite being the faster sword, which isn't actually faster, it's just longer. I guess calling it longer sword would have just made the regular long sword feel self-conscious. No matter what you focus on with your deck, eventually, with enough experimentation and grinding, you will find this system kind of sucks. Okay, so remember when I said this game feels rough, like nearly at the start of the video? Well, my main reason for saying this is the combat and battle chip systems. In later games, these have so many cool aspects and options to pick from that show just how varied strategies can be. People still play 5 and 6 competitively, that's how good the combat gets later. But in this first game, it's certainly the first game. You do have plenty of battle chips to find and use in building your deck, but it's entirely random and the guaranteed finds at shops have such a small selection. Higsby, my dude, you're great, but please, get some more inventory. None of these are helpful. One of the main reasons I stick to Shockwaves and Quakes is because the enemies that drop them are all over the place, so grinding for more doesn't take too long. There's this obnoxious delay between the use of some chips but not others that cause me to get hit more than I'd like, and the actual usage of some attacks just feels so sluggish. Like, by the time you're able to line up your attack and execute your plan, the enemy's already moved house and is currently on a flight to the Caribbean. Plus, some enemy gimmicks are just annoying. I'm looking at you, stupid spookies, vanishing whenever I enter your row, you jerks. And you, hardheads, yeah, just be invincible for so long. That's real interesting. And don't even get me started on the fanners, because they're really easy, I don't have much to say. Not to mention, if you want to get some of the better quality attacks, you need to dive deep down into the net to even have a chance of finding the higher power viruses, a task made all the harder by the utter lack of navigation tools offered in this game. Everywhere on the net looks the same, with the same road pattern and mostly the same backgrounds, even going into the undernet, the super secret villain's hideout place where World 3 hangs out. It looks the same as any other space, and I can't tell you how frustrating it is how I don't have a NordVPN ad here. It's just too perfect. They don't even tell you the name of your current area, so looking up viruses on the wiki just doesn't help. Oh, I want the stronger version of this virus's attack. Where can I find it? Well, that's easy. It's at Internet 12. Happy hunting. The only time where things look different is in the dungeons, and don't you worry, we'll get there soon. It's just so irritating to navigate a samey road in an open void with no real noticeable landmarks or signposts while trying to find where I need to go next. And you can't even access most of the net. You need to find other people to grant you access to certain areas. What, is Lan's dad not paying his internet provider enough, or did his mom set up parental lock features on his computer, the one location where you can access the net? Navigation in Battle Network 1 is just, frankly, a slog. Bill Gates, how could you do this to me? I'm not saying the combat is outright terrible, just unpolished and slow compared to future entries. If you can click down a gear and accept the fact some enemies are just a bit too fast for nearly every attack in this game, it can be fun. Seeing a string of battle chips and immediately executing an attack plan just right is, oh, it's so satisfying. Even if you have to go so far out of your way to get some good chips, the ones you can find just winning battles and going into shops give you enough to find a good groove. This first iteration of the combat isn't bad necessarily, it's just, man, coming back to this after experiencing how great it can be is hard to ignore. Then we get to the dungeons, or at least Battle Network's equivalent to dungeons. You go through one of these every time World 3 does something stupid, and they have some kind of unique gimmick to set them apart. The oven has these fires you need to extinguish. Oh, firewalls, I just got that. It's by far the simplest feature, not much to say here. Then there's the ice level, where you need to strategically slide across ice paths using water spouts to clear the way when needed. Side note, in order to clear one path, you need to find someone's kidnapped son and he's in a car just outside the school. So that's just dumb on several levels. Okay, then there's the classroom area where you have to enter codes to unlock doors. The first few actually relate to places in the school you can just go and find. But then they just have you start guessing. That's certainly not annoying and tedious. Nope, everyone loves Mastermind. The stoplight dungeon is actually kinda cool. There are unavoidable switches that alternate colored platforms. Favorite dungeon by far, they get some cool puzzles out of it, even if the boss fight against Color Man is pretty lame. Yes, Color Man. I know it looks like it should be Clown Man, but it officially isn't for some reason. I don't know why. And the last one is, oh geez, the electricity dungeon. Navigating a game with maze-like areas in a space with invisible paths? Yeah, sure, that doesn't sound like the dumbest idea possible. Oh, and why not stick a totally invisible upward path on the side of an invisible path so the player just walks in circles trying to find it in a panic of growing frustration? Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. You know what? Throw in these stupid battery puzzles while you're at it, where the components you need to solve its trial and error logic have limited test uses before needing a recharge. Sounds perfect! Now, by this point, it might sound like I really hate Battle Network 1. That's because I kind of do. It's just such a weird mix of great ideas and stupid design elements, all wrapped up in a case of first game in a series syndrome. The battle system is awesome in concept, but actually it's pretty lackluster in hindsight, and even standing on its own has some frustrations. The battle chips are really cool, but using most of them is a waste of time, and deck building can be a massive pain if you aren't the kind of person who likes, say, building a deck in a real card game. Plus, the absolute headache it can be to find enough decent chips that fit together, and that being totally random for the most part. The story is just, well, there really isn't much of it at all, until the end happens, and okay, spoilers from this point on. If you don't want to hear the absolute nonsense of this game's plot, go to this point now. Alright, after taking out most of the World 3 members, it turns out land didn't actually prevent them from accomplishing their goal of gathering the 4 super programs. Dr. Wily and his right-hand man Yahoos combined the fire, electric, wood, and water programs together to form the Light Virus, and broadcast their intentions to use it against the world satellites to take control of the world network. After locating the secret metro line hidden directly under the school, you head off to Wily's island to stop his evil schemes. Land better get some extra credit for this at the very least. You rescue the former members of World 3 that helped you earlier and go through a series of locked doors that give you a small revisit of each dungeon, including the electric one. Oh joy. And as you climb up the island to face
Dr. Wily,
your friends show up to help so they can at least claim to have done so. Then you face off against Yahoot and his navvy Magic Man. For the longest time, I thought he was original to this series, but it turns out he's based on a robot master from MegaMan and Base. So that's kind of cool. He's also one of the more annoying fights, and it took me forever to beat him my first run through, but I guess I did a better job building my deck this time because I won on my first try. But once the battle is done and Mega Man is ready to get to Wily, the Light Virus springs out to give Magic Man one last burst of power, severely damaging the Blue Bomber. As he lay on the brink of deletion, which could probably be prevented by just jacking out and healing him, but I'll assume he can't because the Light Virus prevented it somehow, Chowd arrives with a special batch file for Lan. Accompanying this is Lan's dad calling to give a revelation that turns the story from Goofy Kids anime to Capcom. Why? During the few times in the game Lan talks to his dad, whose name sadly isn't USB, he keeps bringing up something but keeps getting interrupted before he can tell Lan something important. Now, while our blue best friend is on the brink of digital death and the world is at stake, he decides now is the best time. And this reveal is utterly bonkers. Okay, so 11 years before the start of the game, Lan's father was making progress in developing navis that could effectively empathize with their operators, allowing them to communicate and understand one another on a higher level than before. He was about 95% complete with his code, but couldn't quite get that last part right. Then he had the idea to complete the code by programming human DNA, effectively giving it a greater connection by means of transplanting the user's very being into the navi. Fortunately, and unfortunately, at this time his wife was pregnant and gave birth to twin boys. However, one of them had breathing difficulties and wouldn't last very long, so Dr. Hikari took the DNA of his dying newborn and coded it into his Navi program, therefore creating a NetNavi that could truly connect and understand its user, while simultaneously giving his son a chance to watch over his brother. This Navi is MegaMan.exe. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, it is an integral plot point in the Battle Network series how its iteration of Mega Man is a sentient AI avatar partially coded from the DNA of the main character's stillborn twin brother. And as I'm writing this, it's just striking me how similar this is to the whole your wife is your arm thing from Bionic Commando. Why do we make fun of your wife is your arm but not your dead twin is your battle Tamagotchi? Capcom, why do you like this trope? Is it your kink or something? Okay, look, if I went into all the many reasons this is probably the dumbest plot twist since insert random David Cage story here, it would probably double the length of this video, and I'd quite like to stop talking at some point. I'm sure you can figure out at least a few reasons on your own, but just know this kind of encapsulates the level of story writing in this game. And also, Lan's brother was named Hub. Capcom, you're really pushing it here. Once that info has been dumped on you like a 2-ton pile of fertilizer, you make your way to Wily's lab where the Mad Doctor tells you why he's doing all this in the first place. It turns out he was old colleagues with Dr. Tadashi Hikari, Lan's grandfather, many years ago. While Hikari was working on networks, Wily focused his attention on robotics, but when they presented their research to a board for funding, Dr. Hikari won out and Wily's research was put to an end. So, all these years later, he gathered the vital programs and made the life virus to take over the world that is now so dependent on the network made by his old rival. I feel like he could have just continued his research on his own, considering how much funding he clearly needed to do all this in the first place, but whatever. Honestly, this just doesn't even come close to the whole Mega Man is actually Lan's brother sort of reveal from moments ago. So you jack into the rocket to fight the life virus, which is actually super easy despite the buildup, the lab explodes, and the heroes escape back home where Lan continues to not get mail signals, ending Battle Network 1. Man, they really just piled everything into those last few minutes. Mega Man Battle Network 1 is a very odd game of a duck. Wait. The team at Capcom clearly knew what they wanted to do. Make a kid-friendly RPG like Pokemon, have it centered around collectible card game-like mechanic, make a relatable world that felt approachable, establish the main cast and some recurring villains. That's all fine. It's just, when it comes to execution, that's where cracks start showing and frustration begins. The lack of a solid story is honestly just, whatever, fine, I can live with it considering that clearly wasn't the focus. Characters lacking characterization? Fine. Sure, I guess I can give that a pass as well. The best part of Battle Network has always been the unique combat and collecting battle chips, experimenting with different tactics to find your favorite while exploring a virtual world. In this game, those aspects are fine. The main problem is, why would you settle for fine when you could have fantastic? The biggest thing working against Battle Network 1 is the fact it's Battle Network 1. With all that in mind, should you play it? Yes, but only if you play the Legacy Collection with Buster Max mode. This is an option accessible at any time that multiplies the power of your normal Buster shots by 100, which means you can walk up to another net battler all common viruses just vanish, bosses take seconds, it just saves so much time and hassle when you just have a rapid fire delete button. During this playthrough, I admit, I switched it on when dealing with annoying sections or bosses I just didn't care enough to deal with legitimately. It's also great for grinding sections, letting you rack up high buster levels against strong viruses so you have a better chance of getting good chips. Honestly, I'm just glad this collection exists, and good on Capcom for adding features like Buster Max to make these old games easier to get through. After all these years, not only do I finally get to finish these games, but I can tell you for sure that the first one really isn't all that great. Pick up the collection and give it a playthrough to get to grips with the world and combat, and switch on Buster Max when you start seeing those growing pains. So yeah, I'm glad I finally got to experience this first game, even if doing so isn't really good. If you pick up the collection, and I highly recommend you do, there really isn't much excuse to not go through the first just to see where it all started. Will I play it again? Maybe. It's janky and awkward and massively outshined by its sequels, but there is a strange charm to seeing such a basic origin for a series that, again, still has competitive tournaments to this day. Impressive, if nothing else. I'm not sure if they were planning to make so many sequels early on, or if they kept going because of continued success, but it does mean I now have 9 more games to get through. Eventually. Is it too late to jack out?